Afternoon, everyone. You can say afternoon, Carl. I'm also known as the governor. You heard my name was Karl George. But the governor, not in a Vinnie Jones, director of those things that we see, not in a gangster kind of way, but in an all things governance kind of way. I get tingly about corporate governance. And 3 things I want to do today. Number 1 is get you tingly about corporate governance. Number 2, get you to understand some of the principles of corporate governance. And then number 3, simplify some of those definitions, some of those things that you think are understandable, to get you to be the most effective person in the boardroom, so we can change the world, one board member at a time. In fact, you're all looking so good today. I just want to comment on that. And most of you have made a really good effort to make sure you look good. I'm only joking. But what I want you to do is say, you look good, I'm feeling good, and I'm going to get tingly about governance today. Can you do that right now? Because the more you give me, the more I can get it. So do it now. Just say, you look good, I'm feeling good, and I'm going to get tingly about governance today. Excellent. You see, what I want to do is find out how we prevent, how we mitigate, how we detect corporate failure, and even learn from all of that. I want to make sure that in the boardroom, we move away from where we was in the past with this VUCA. And everybody remember VUCA? 1980s, Warren Beatty said this, that we are in an environment of vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But I think that's dated. I think we need to move more towards VCAS. So at the end, if I forget, remind me to tell you what I mean by VCAS. The challenge we have, however, is that in the boardroom, the people that are the leaders in business, as Bob Garrett says in his book, The Fish Rots from the Head, are what we call baby boomers. That's the generation that remembers when the black and white TV came out. That's the generation that we see that has business in the terms of they're the ones in the boardroom. In the next 10 years, there's the ones going to be 60 or 70 years old. But my generation, Generation X, not my father's generation, and you know those fathers where they've got their mobile phone, or that generation that actually hitting it like that. In fact, my boys say that to me sometimes, the way I'm using the phone. But I remember when the first mobile phone came out. I had one, and I can't really call it mobile. If you think about mobile phones look like today, the technology has moved on so much. And you see, I remember back in my day when the music was Bob Marley and One Love. I remember going out in the morning, putting on my skates, and coming back late at night. Not like the generation now who put something on their head and they're virtually interacting with people and they're stuck in a room somewhere. You see, the generations have changed. Our thinking has changed. The way we work has changed. You can see blockbusters there. I remember having to go out and leave my house and go and choose a video, hope it was there. Do you remember those days, some of you? And if it wasn't there, I'd have to have something else. Go back home, rewind it if they hadn't rewound it before, watch it, rewind it, then take it back if I remember, so I didn't get fined. But the millennials, they don't have that. You see, they can stream from a number of sources and get their information on demand. We actually call them the microwave generation. Simon Sinek says the entitled generation, because every generation tries to do more for the next generation. We don't want you to go through what we went through. So they sometimes want things on demand. And the post-millennials, where we have Facebook, they now have Snapchat, and you can probably help me, Instagram and Twitter and all these things. Some of them I haven't even heard of because the generations have changed. What's this got to do with the boardroom? What's this got to do with governance? You see, I predict that we're going to see a catastrophe, a disaster over the next decade like we've seen in the past. We remember Grenfell. We remember the 72 people that died and others injured. You see, governance isn't just about the things we can see in the private sector. We had a run on the banks because of the banking crisis, and David Walker did a review which gave us a new governance code. But in the public sector, not only have we seen death in the fires, but we've seen Victoria Climbié, unfortunately, was killed by her parents, her carers, sorry. And baby P, killed by step-parents. Bit of doom here. But what has governance got to do with all of that? In the charitable sector, I saw Kids Company get millions of pounds worth of funding from the government and then gone into liquidation. So the Francis inquiry into health, avoidable deaths with the elderly. The Layman inquiry, which gives us the Children's Act and Every Child Matters. All of these inquiries got some similar themes. Number one, repeated warnings ignored. Gross negligence. Incompetence. No national guidelines. None of us collaborating across agencies. And these are what the inquiries are saying about what we should be doing. So what's this governance thing that I keep talking about? You see, governance, as Sir Adrian Cadbury said in the report that he wrote in 1992, is the system by which companies are directed and controlled. So systems means that it isn't one individual or a department, it's a whole structure within an organisation. It's about directing the travel, and it's about being strategic and not operational. And I want to tell you very quickly about 3 generations of governance. The first generation I call dominance. And you'll see there Maxwell, Robert Maxwell, very successful entrepreneur, politician, businessman, even won the Military Cross for bravery. But in his business, what he said goes. And if you didn't agree with him, then you were out. And that's good sometimes to get businesses to work effectively when they're not complicated, as Generation 1 governance is. But when he died, and we found that he'd taken the pension funds of one of the subsidiaries to prop up his empire, people were devastated. Generation 2 governance. I remember this by thinking about blind spots. You know, when you're driving your car, you've got to look in the view mirror, rear view, you've got to look at your wing mirrors. But if you don't turn and look, you're going to miss something. Enron missed something. The world's 7th biggest company at the time. 1 minute, $98 per share. 6 months later, $1 per share. 100 billion turnover, 30,000 employees. How comes nobody saw it coming? Blind spots. One of them is cultural myopia. You believe your own hype about your company. Another one is sector arrogance. This is the way we do it in our sector. A third one is the good old days. You know, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Because that's how it was working all this time, and you have complacency. And Generation 3 governance, I call this disruption. I call it disruption, but there's multiple disrupting factors. In fact, I call them multiple black swans. Nicholas Taleb in his book talks about black swans, and black swan events are those things that are unpredictable, they're outliers. And if you had an unpredictable event to impact your business, what could you do about it? We're then thinking of the perfect storm of unpredictable events all happening at the same time. That's where Generation 3 governance is. Thomas Cook, as you know, one of the world's oldest travel companies, left 100,000 people stranded when it went down. But think of the perfect storm. People have staycations now because of the climate. We don't go away. We can make sure that we have our holidays here. We have the people who on social media find out that somebody was ill, they died, and it was at a resort, and then all of a sudden, nobody's traveling anymore. At the same time as people be able to book their holidays on their own. They don't have to go through a consolidation agency. They can do it all themselves. On the top of trying to raise investment, a perfect storm of events. That's where third generation governance comes from. I talked about my day I talked about my generation. There's a song which says, "What's love got to do with it?" Anybody know who sang that? That was from my day. Just tell your neighbour. You see, what's love got to do is nothing to do with my talk, but what's the fourth industrial revolution got to do with everything that I've been speaking about? Professor Klaus Schwab, the founder and now chair of the World Economic Forum, wrote the book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And what's that all about? He says that the way we work and live is being disrupted by IoT, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, by all of that technology. Everything's being transformed. That's the current and future environment that we're going to see. And you can see a picture there of a building that I visited in Dubai very recently. That building was built with 3D printing. In fact, one of my colleagues is here today from Dubai in terms of how we delivered. And what I'm trying to say to you is Dubai is going to try and be the world's economic center for the fourth industrial revolution and how we're working. What has this got to do with what we've got to do with changing the way the world works? Remember I told you at the beginning to remind me of something. It was about VUCA. You see, in this new world, we've got V for a virtual world. Anybody of you remember in the Kingsman, the holograms, when the people were having their board meeting? I can see a future where that's the way we're going to meet. Remember I told you about the young people who are not out on their roller skates, but they're in their room with a headphone on in this augmented reality world. That's the world that we're going to see. The I is for info and biotech. Info and biotech combining together. Not only can we 3D print buildings, and I think that's fantastic, but we can 3D print organs. Wow, you say. You can say wow. And the C is convergence. I'm seeing all of that technology converging at such a rapid pace. Moore's law says this. Moore's law says that the technology is doubling in space every year at the same time as the cost reducing. But convergence says this. It's almost like Moore's law on steroids. That's how fast things are going, because the speed is there, the data is there, the technology is there, and everything's happening together. In that virtual world in Saudi Arabia, they've got a computer, a robot, which is the world's first citizen. Her name's Sophia. Wow, you say. Or I'll say wow, and you'll just watch me. So we move on from V, the I, the C, to A, the analytics. And you'll hear about blockchain, you'll hear about algorithms, you'll hear about bots, the things that can look technology and predict and do all these types of things. And the S is for security and systems and facial recognition and audio recognition. And the other day, I was speaking to a colleague of mine, I was telling him about an event I was going to put on, and my phone, your phone's listening to you by the way, my phone straight away sent me sent me a reminder and said to me, do you want to airdrop that event to the person you're speaking to? That freaked me out. VUCA. So let's wrap this all up. When I talked about the 3 generations of governance, if you remember, the first generation was that dominance hierarchy, to be specific. Within that first generation, the antidote to that type of boardroom is to get people who are independent to sit on the boards. So they're independent of the organisation. The second generation of governance that I spoke about was that complex generation, and there were blind spots. And the antidote to that one, the way we get the boards more diverse, is to look at functional diversity. Independence wasn't enough. We now have to have people who've got financial skills, people who've got legal skills, HR skills, but also people who are different ages, genders, and ethnicity. Does that make sense? So that we can combat the complexities that the blind spots, you know, the things you can't see, are showing you. The third generation of governance, however, is much more complicated. It's not good enough just to have independent people. It's not good enough to have independent people who have got functional diversity. And we're doing a lot of work on that, of getting more women in the boardroom and more ethnic minorities in the boardroom with the various reports and reviews that we see. And also Generation Y and Z in the boardroom, because they think differently. You see, the diversity that we need, there is a mismatch. There's a mismatch between the technology, the problems we face, and the people that inhabit the boardroom. Ladies and gentlemen, we need a different way of thinking. We need cognitive diversity. And to get that cognitive diversity, we're going to need another generation complementing the people who are currently dominating the boardroom. Margaret Heffernan, in her book, Willful Blindness, reminds us of a challenge that we've got. You see, remember I said to you about Enron, that big utility company that went bust in the early 2000s? When the judge was trying that case, he said to Jeffrey Skilling and Kenneth Lay, chief exec and chairman of Enron, he said, if there's something you should have known, something you could have known, and something you chose not to know, then you are personally liable. That's willful blindness. I think we can change the world one board member at a time. But remember what I said to you. If there's something you should know or could have known, but you've just chosen not to know, we are all still liable. Thank you very much.